Welcome to Left Africa.
Imagine a massive shipping container sitting on a sweltering dock in Cape Town right now.
Right.
It is packed, floor to ceiling, with life-saving medicine. And local clinics a few miles away are, they're desperately rationing whatever pills they have left.
Yeah, it's a grim picture.
But no one is allowed to open the doors of that container. And not because of a strike not because the medicine is expired. It stays locked because the legal authority that pays the dock workers, authorizes the transport, and greenlights the distribution simply vanished overnight.
That image, it perfectly encapsulates the bureaucratic paralysis we're looking at.
Yeah.
You have the physical resources sitting right there, but the administrative machinery required to actually move them has just been dismantled.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today we are taking a deep dive into the June 2026 PEPFAR and South Africa HIV full situation briefing.
Exactly.
Our mission is to break down exactly what this document reveals about a monumental shift in global health policy, which is the U.S. State Department's phased drawdown of PEPFAR funding in South Africa.
And it's a huge shift.
It really is. Now, before we look at a single data point, I need to be incredibly clear with you, our listener. The sources we're looking at today contain highly politically charged content.
It's a very highly charged, yes.
Right. We are talking about the U.S. State Department, former President Trump's executive orders, and highly sensitive South African domestic and international policies. So I want to say right up front, we are not taking any sides or endorsing the viewpoints of this briefing.
Right. We're just analysts here.
Exactly. Our job is simply to unpack the facts, the projections, and the claims exactly as they are presented in the source material. Nothing more, nothing less.
Which is an essential boundary to set, honestly, because the briefing we are analyzing frames these events in absolute unsparing terms.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at this strictly to understand the mechanics of what is happening on the ground and the analysis provided by the public health experts who actually authored this brief.
Because to understand the stakes, you have to realize this isn't just a department trimming a budget, It is like pulling a massive load-bearing pillar out of a skyscraper that has stood for over 20 years.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You pull that pillar out, the structural integrity of the entire building is compromised immediately. And today, we are going to look at the cracks that are already tearing up the foundation. So, setting the stage, what actually triggered this crisis briefing?
Well, the immediate catalyst is a formal announcement from the U.S. State Department. They initiated a phased drawdown of PEPFAR in South Africa.
Right. And just for anyone unfamiliar, PEPFAR stands for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, right?
Correct. And this specific drawdown terminates between $400 and $456 million in funding per year.
I really want to pause on that number. $450 million isn't just a big number in a vacuum.
No, it's not.
According to the briefing, that represents 17 to 21% of South Africa's total HIV expenditure. Taking a fifth of a nation's disease-fighting budget away isn't like a belt-tightening measure. It completely alters the physics of how they run their healthcare system. But the document also outlines the official rationale given for this drawdown, which it isn't based on public health metrics, right?
No, not at all. The briefing states that the official rationale provided for the drawdown points to two specific political grievances.
Okay, what are they?
First, an alleged failure by the South African government to protect white Afrikaners.
Wow, okay.
And second, intense policy disputes regarding South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the ICJ, the International Court of Justice.
And there is a detail in this report that frankly just blew my mind.
The notification part.
Yes. The South African Health Ministry stated they were not formally informed of this decision beforehand.
Yeah, which is practically unheard of.
Right. If I'm understanding how global health works, you don't just send a text message to end a $500 million program.
You really don't. Public health initiatives of this scale operate on years, sometimes decades of collaborative forecasting.
Right, because of the supply chains.
Exactly. You have to predict pharmaceutical needs 3 years out just to keep the factories producing enough pills. When a disruption of this magnitude happens without formal multi-agency coordination, the resulting supply chain shock is immediate.
It just bypasses all the usual systems.
Yeah, it completely bypasses all the standard diplomatic channels that normally act as shock absorbers for this kind of thing.
Which makes me wonder about the architecture holding this whole thing up. I mean, if a program this massive is suddenly being drawn down, what happens to the legal structure?
Well, that's where things get really complicated.
Because you can't just pause a multi-hundred-million-dollar international apparatus like you're canceling a streaming subscription. There have to be contracts, mandates, personnel.
Right. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the foundation for PEPFAR hasn't just been cut in June 2026. The legal mandate for it actually expired over a year ago.
Wait, what?
Yeah. PEPFAR ran continuously for 22 years, but its statutory reauthorization by the U.S. Congress quietly lapsed on March 25, 2025, after only getting a one-year extension in 2024.
So the law that actually says PEPFAR exists and has a budget just vanished from the books?
It lapsed, yeah. And compounding that lapsed authorization is Executive Order 14169.
Okay, the Trump executive order.
Right, which President Trump signed in January 2025. That order placed a hard pause on all foreign aid. So the briefing described this resulting environment as a double legal vacuum.
A double legal vacuum. So it's like a nuclear silo where both keys have been thrown away.
That's exactly it.
Because first, you have an executive order freezing all broad operations. And second, the specific law that pays the guards and maintains the facility doesn't exist anymore. There's literally no bureaucratic mechanism left to move the money or make a decision.
That dual key metaphor is perfectly accurate. Operating a multi-hundred-million-dollar health initiative without statutory reauthorization fundamentally changes the security of the whole program.
Because no one has the authority to do anything.
Exactly. It means the administrators at PEPFAR have no legal cover to make long-term commitments. I mean, they can't sign a 3-year contract for antiretroviral drugs if they don't legally exist on paper next month.
Which takes us out of the paperwork and into the real world. Let's look at what this double legal vacuum actually does to human beings.
And it's devastating.
The briefing highlights a terrifying contrast between what the models warned would happen and the reality that is playing out on the ground right now.
Right. So back in February 2025, the Annals of Internal Medicine published highly detailed projections modeling a U.S. withdrawal.
And what did they find?
They projected that a complete withdrawal over a 10-year timeline would result in an additional 565,000 new HIV infections and 601,000 excess deaths.
God, over 600,000 deaths.
Yeah, and even a 50% cut modeled out to over 315,000 excess deaths.
Okay, I have to push back a little bit on those models because whenever I see a 10-year projection of 600,000 deaths, my instinct is to assume it's a worst-case theoretical, you know?
Sure, that makes sense.
Like, it's an academic model that assumes a static world where no one adapts, the local government doesn't step up, and the worst possible variables all align perfectly.
Well, skepticism of 10-year epidemiological models is usually healthy, but the briefing makes a vital distinction here.
Okay.
These aren't abstract guesses based on generic virus behavior. These models are built directly on 20 years of PEPFAR's own hard empirical data.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they aren't guessing the impact of a dollar. They know exactly how many infections are prevented per dollar spent because they've been tracking the specific dollar-to-pill ratio in these exact communities since 2003.
And tragically, we don't even have to wait 10 years to see if the models are right. The HealthBeat data from April 2026 is in this briefing, and it shows the engine is actively stalling out.
It really is.
According to the ground data, we are already seeing 4.7 million fewer people tested. That is a 22% drop from 2024.
And we're also seeing 78,000 fewer new diagnoses, which is a 20% drop.
Wow.
And 2 million fewer people on PPP, which is the preventive treatment, and that represents a 10% drop.
That testing drop is what we really need to dig into, because the briefing points out that community-based testing ended essentially overnight.
Yes. Immediately.
And we aren't talking about people walking into hospitals. We are talking about door-to-door testing and mobile clinics. Why did those stop the second the legal vacuum hit?
Because that specific vital infrastructure was almost entirely funded by PEPFAR. Community testing is, it's really the linchpin of infectious disease control.
Right.
If you rely solely on a patient feeling sick, walking miles to a rural hospital, and asking for an HIV test, you have already lost the battle against community transmission.
Because it's been spreading all that time.
Exactly. The virus has been spreading for months by that point. Mobile clinics drive down dirt roads into communities where a hospital is 2 days away. They offer testing to the most vulnerable populations.
So when the funding freezes, you can't buy gas for the mobile clinic vans. You can't pay the driver. You can't buy the rapid test kits. Ending that overnight means the virus is spreading completely unmonitored. It's like turning off the radar during a storm.
That's exactly what it is. And once the radar's off, the infections multiply silently, which then brings a massive wave of sick patients to the hospitals a few years later, which just overwhelms an already fragile system.
If you're driving to work right now and hearing these numbers, the most obvious question is probably screaming in your head.
Why doesn't someone else just pay for it?
Exactly. Why can't South Africa or an international group like the UN just step in, write a check, and cover the gap? If this is a proven program saving millions of lives, surely someone can bridge a $450 million shortfall.
Right. Well, it comes down to the sheer mechanics of national budgets and the absolute scale of the epidemic.
Okay, break that down for us.
South Africa currently has the world's largest HIV epidemic, with 7.8 million people living with the virus. To replace the lost PEPFAR services, just between 2025 and 2028, South Africa would need to suddenly generate between $622 million and $1.4 billion.
And the briefing notes their health budget is already maxed out. It sits at 16.8% of total government spending.
Yeah, there's zero fiscal headroom.
Right. You can't just squeeze $1 billion out of a national budget that is already stretched to the breaking point without shutting down schools or road maintenance.
Exactly. And the international community is similarly constrained. The Global Fund, which is the other major pillar of international health funding, operates on rigid, multi-year replenishment cycles.
So they can't just pivot.
No, they simply do not have a slush fund sitting around to absorb a gap of this massive size. Furthermore, major European donors like the UK, Germany, and France are dealing with their own domestic fiscal constraints.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. And I mean that in a deeply concerning way, because the fallout isn't just about the immediate treatment of HIV in South Africa. The ripple effects are staggering.
They really go far beyond South Africa.
Yeah, because South Africa is also losing approximately $400 million a year in NIH. That's the National Institutes of Health Research funding. They were the largest foreign recipient of NIH grants.
That NIH funding is essentially the invisible engine of global health. It doesn't just buy pills for current patients. It funds a massive clinical trial infrastructure required for tuberculosis research and future vaccine development.
Let's explain why that matters. Because a clinical trial isn't just a laboratory with some microscopes.
Not at all.
It's a vast human network. You have to track thousands of patients, sometimes for 5 to 10 years, to see if a vaccine works. If the NIH funding pauses for even a month, you can't pay the staff tracking those patients.
Right, and then the patients scatter.
You lose the cohort. You don't just delay the research by a month. You trash 5 years of data and have to start over from zero. We are literally losing the infrastructure for future cures.
What's fascinating here is that the structural collapse goes even further than research.
How so?
It impacts the daily lives of people who don't even live in South Africa. Because of this drawdown, over 700,000 people across 28 sub-Saharan African countries are projected to lose access to their preventative PrEP medicine.
Hang on, I need to make sure I understand the mechanics of this. How does a funding cut explicitly targeted at South Africa cause people in 28 other countries, places that might still have their U.S. funding, to lose their preventative medicine?
It is entirely about the economics of pharmaceutical supply chains. The antiretroviral supply lines for the entire African continent were built around PEPFAR procurement.
Oh, I see. So PEPFAR acts like the anchor tenant in a massive shopping mall.
Exactly.
Because they guarantee they will buy hundreds of millions of pills. Pharmaceutical companies spin up massive factories in India or wherever. That immense purchasing power creates economies of scale that drive the price of a single pill down to pennies.
Precisely. They are the centralized buyer making the whole market viable. When you disrupt the largest guaranteed buyer in that market, the factories can't sustain those massive production runs.
They have to scale back.
Right, they scale back. The economies of scale collapse. Suddenly, the cost per pill skyrockets for everyone else. It sends a pricing shockwave through the entire pharmaceutical supply chain, meaning those 28 other countries suddenly can't afford the drugs on their existing budgets.
That is a phenomenal insight. An administrative pause in Washington regarding South Africa means a clinic in Kenya suddenly can't afford its shipments.
Yep, it's all connected.
Understanding the sheer continental scale of this fallout makes the briefing's ultimate conclusion really stand out. It changes the fundamental nature of international aid.
To fully grasp this shift, you have to look at the genesis of the program. PEPFAR was launched back in 2003 by President George W. Bush.
Right.
It was explicitly designed, pitched, and funded as a humanitarian emergency response to a continent-wide crisis.
And it was wildly successful. The UNAIDS estimate in this document says PEPFAR saved 26 million lives globally over 2 decades. It built the world's largest disease-specific treatment program.
For 20 years, it was considered a shining example of American soft power and absolute bipartisan consensus.
Yeah.
But the briefing's bottom line presents a harsh new assessment. It states that this dismantling is happening entirely independent of health outcomes, efficiency metrics, or epidemiological grounds.
And again, we are reporting the analytical claims made within this briefing by these experts.
Yeah.
And the document explicitly claims this is a deliberate dismantling as political punishment.
Yes, those are their exact words.
The briefing states, the message being sent globally is that American global health partnerships are now contingent on political obedience.
This raises an important question. What does it mean for the mechanics of global diplomacy when a 20-year humanitarian architecture is reclassified as an instrument of direct political leverage?
Right.
If international aid is no longer driven by disease eradication metrics, but by immediate political alignment, the entire predictable framework of international development is essentially dismantled.
It turns life-saving medicine into a geopolitical bargaining chip. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most stressful part of this briefing. The unanswered question.
The unknowns.
Exactly. We know the history, we understand how the supply chains are breaking, and we see the dire mortality projections. But the briefing openly admits there are massive gaping holes in how this will actually play out in the coming weeks.
Right. The document outlines 5 specific critical unknowns that are causing chaos on the ground right now.
What's the first one?
First, what does a phased timeline actually mean operationally? Where are we talking about winding down over 6 months, 18 months? Or is it an immediate hard stop on new funding?
And if you are a clinic manager looking at a shelf of antiretrovirals, that timeline is everything. It dictates whether you give a patient a 3-month supply or tell them they have to cut their pills in half today.
Exactly. Second, will there be humanitarian waivers for existing patients?
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, historically, during aid freezes, there were sometimes administrative carve-outs ensuring people currently on life-saving medication wouldn't just be cut off cold turkey.
Right.
But the double legal vacuum means no one knows if those waivers are even legally possible right now.
Third is the procurement pipeline, which goes back to that shipping container sitting on the dock we talked about earlier.
Yes.
What happens to the antiretroviral drugs that have already been purchased but not yet delivered? Are they just caught in legal limbo forever?
That's the million-dollar question. Fourth, if South Africa is being targeted for political reasons, as the briefing claims, which country is next?
Oh, man.
It introduces a chilling uncertainty for every other nation relying on these partnerships. If you are a health minister in another country, you suddenly have to wonder if a diplomatic misstep will cost you your nation's health budget.
And finally, the fifth question. Will other global fund donors reduce their contributions using the massive U.S. withdrawal as a political excuse to shrink their own budgets?
It's a very real fear.
So what does this all mean? Think about this for a second. If you are listening to this right now, what stands out to you when you hear that list of unknowns?
It's pretty overwhelming.
Because for me, I am genuinely floored that a massive, intricate global supply chain has a to-be-determined status on life-saving medicine that is practically already in the mail.
Yeah.
We're talking about literal shipments of drugs that keep people alive sitting in warehouses, and no one has the legal authority to sign the clipboard to open the boxes.
It reflects the chaotic, very real-world consequences of that double legal vacuum we discussed. Without statutory reauthorization and under a blanket foreign aid pause, there are 0 established administrative protocols for how to ethically or logistically wind down a program of this size.
And the bureaucracy is entirely paralyzed.
Completely paralyzed, and the virus does not wait for paperwork.
No, it doesn't. So, to summarize the journey we've taken through this briefing today, we started by looking at a stable 22-year-old pillar of global health, a centralized program that built the economies of scale to save 26 million lives.
A true monumental achievement.
And we've seen exactly how, through lapsed authorizations and executive action, it devolved into a paralyzed legal vacuum. A vacuum that isn't just theoretical, but is actively resulting in millions of fewer tests, a collapse in mobile clinic infrastructure, and data-backed projections of over 600,000 excess deaths in South Africa alone.
And we've examined how the source material frames this transition, not as a tragic accident of bureaucratic budgeting, but as a deliberate pivot. A pivot that turns humanitarian aid into a mechanism of political leverage, carrying devastating, immediate ripple effects across the entire clinical and pharmaceutical landscape of the African continent.
It is a massive, heavy topic to process, but there is one final thought I want to leave you with, something to mull over that builds on the economic realities we uncovered today.
Okay.
We talked about how the pharmaceutical supply chain for the entire African continent was built around PEPFAR's massive procurement power, and how that centralized buying drove prices down. But zoom out even further. Think about the global market.
That's huge.
If the world's absolute largest guaranteed buyer of these specific antiretroviral drugs suddenly vanishes from the ledger, what happens to the global pharmaceutical market?
That is the big question.
Does the cost of life-saving medicine suddenly skyrocket everywhere else in the world, in Asia, in Eastern Europe, in South America, simply because the global economies of scale just collapsed overnight?
It's highly possible.
It's a profound question about how interconnected our survival really is, and something to keep a very close eye on in the months ahead. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack this, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.